everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome to my live. I am flying solo today, going a little old school, and we're even going older school with a hot topic. Oh, it's hot. Get ready for the hotness. Our hot topic is, will traditional marriage exist in 50 to 100 years in mainstream society? Ooh, juicy. So, as you guys know, I am a person who I love to talk to people. I love to be like I'm a hardcore extrovert by definition, meaning I draw my energy from being around other people. I'm not someone who takes pleasure really in like not like just being by myself. That's not something that I'm like, oh, that sounds fun or exciting to me. So with conversations that I have with my loved ones, with my friends, with complete strangers in my life is really where I find the most value in learning about people and the choices that they make and who they are and just this beautiful diversity and the uniqueness of every person. And so a lot of my topics and especially hot topics come from those really meaningful conversations that I have with people. And it just so happens that over probably the course of only the last 3 to 4 weeks, I've had conversations with at least 5 different women from various aspects of my life. Again, anywhere from total strangers to people who are closest to me. And we've been having these very, very topical conversation around the challenges between a husband and a wife in a traditional marriage. And by traditional, I always like to provide context in terms of a definition for me. And my definition of a traditional marriage is between a man and a woman who are they're getting married with the intention of spending the rest of their life together exclusively with that other person. And in addition to that, more than likely trying to have a family. And it typically is not just a legal, binding agreement in terms of a marriage, but it's also a religious one. So for me, that's the very, very old school traditional thing. Now, y'all know me well enough to know at this point, I'm not a big traditional person. I like to take aspects of a lot of different cultures and traditions, and then me and my husband, we make our own. We made our own culture here. We made our own traditions and our own family. And so it's really interesting, I think, to just observe, here it is, it's 2022. We are in a completely different age of does traditional marriage still hold up in terms of value that it did just even 30 years ago? So this is something I also think, generationally speaking, is something that's really been called into, traditional marriage has been called into question at such depths in no way that prior generations have, starting now with Gen Xers, which is my generation. Typically people who are about 10 years older than me, and I'm kind of on the, kind of the coming out of Gen X into Gen Y generation. But I would definitely say that my generation has called traditional marriage into question more than anyone. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. One is the baby boomers were really the ones from mainstream society that really brought divorce into the picture. So a lot of my generation are products of divorce, have experienced ugly divorces happening in families. So that's part of it. I think there's another part where we grew up with the birth of technology in terms of the internet. It started when we were teenagers. We weren't born into it, so we still knew life before technology as we know it today. We knew life before the internet. We knew life before computers. We knew life before cable television. We knew life in a very different way, and we've kind of gone through it. So I think there's, in very many ways, we are very much the transitional generation, right? I envy a great deal the way that millennials look at life, their way of looking at life and having already such a tremendous degree of confidence in who they are and not feeling limited in defining themselves based on tradition of their parents or their grandparents, that they're okay with getting out there. And I give a lot of credit to also Gen X parents right now who leave space for that with their kids, to let them figure out who they are, to not confine them in their identity. And so I think, I think my generation, although caught and stuck in this kind of land of transition, we also have learned a lot from what we do want to do and what we don't want to do from our parents and prior generations, things that qualities we admire from our parents and things that we want to do differently. So again, I think that Gen Xers are really calling traditional marriage into question in a way that no generation has done before. And so let's dive into that. Let's talk about that a little bit. And I want to share with you, again, this is coming from my admittedly personal experiences in my life, within my friends, within my community, within the conversations that I've held. So I recognize that this very much is my perception. And so when we talk about this topic as to whether or not traditional marriage will even exist in 50 to 100 years in mainstream society, please understand that that's where all of this observation has come from, my own personal experiences. So let's talk tech. The reality is that the need for traditional marriage may not have or doesn't have the same footing that it used to have. There was a time that gender roles played a huge part in the need for traditional marriage. It was under the assumption that the woman's role was to be home, raising the kids, not working, and that the man's role was to be the person bringing home the bacon and doing and working in the job. And then in addition to that, to be, even more, and this, by the way, this is how my parents were. So this is a very familiar place for me. That, my dad worked. My mom, although extremely educated and was a surgical nurse, made the decision for herself and for her family that she was going to be home to raise us kids. And then my father was the one who worked very hard and took very good care of our family and was extremely reliable. And literally walked in the door every single day at 5:32 from his job. And was the one who drove us around to sports and activities, and their kids were clearly, 100% the focus of my parents' life. And that was, as a result, as you can imagine, I had an amazing upbringing. But again, times have changed. Women are finally starting to see the ability to earn and be hired for the same jobs, all the same jobs that men do, and make the same amount of income. So I will say, gender roles, but then even more so technology in the sense of the physical need. So a woman and a man needed each other to conceive a child, to bring a child physically into the world. And technology, medical technology, has made it possible for any woman, with the means to do so, to find a donor and go have a child on their own, or potentially to adopt a child on their own, or to have a friendship with someone, or to make an arrangement with someone for them to have a child on their own. So we've got the financial aspect, we've got gender role change, we've got medical technology. These are all things, and at the end of the day now, and I'm sure we'll continue into evolution, where a woman doesn't really need a man to have a child or to raise a child. And so that in and of itself has caused, in today's day and age, there are a lot of different types of families out there. There's a lot of different types of marriages. They're not confines even today of only traditional marriage. Now, do I think that ultimately most people still the ideal situation for them is to fall in love with someone, and as a result of falling in love with someone, they would choose each other for the rest of their lives, and then as a result of choosing each other, they want the same things, which might include children or might not, and then they get married. And I think that that traditional approach is still ultimately what a lot of people are looking for. But what I call into question is with my generation, because of the lack of need in those and not having gender limitations anymore, a woman or a man is going to sit back and say, what are my needs if it's not financial? What are my needs if it's not the physical aspect of bearing children? Well, for a woman, our needs tend to revolve around the need for an emotional connection, emotional intimacy. The ability to have intimate dialogue and conversations with the people we love and care about in our lives. The ability to connect through that emotional connection. It's typically, and again, this is a very big generalization, but most women have that craving and that need. It's also genetically what makes us nurturing parents, right? That as a woman, we make babies in our bodies and we then deliver them and we raise them, and barring typically some type of mental illness, most mothers will instinctually be very nurturing in terms of raising their children and fulfilling that need and nurturing their kids. So there's that really, again, in my circle of people and even with strangers who I've had recent conversations with, the biggest need that a woman has in a marriage is for that emotional intimacy and that connection. The challenge with that is that's not every guy. As a matter of fact, that's not most guys. You know, and there's probably a lot of married women out there who are like aggressively nodding in agreement, right? Like most guys are not someone who you describe as emotionally intimate. You know, they're not seeking out these in-depth, lengthy conversations of, you know, being vulnerable and sharing their souls and their feelings and their most in-depth, you know, backgrounds. It's something that a lot of times requires a little digging and it requires a little coercion to get that information out of them. And the reality is that women are only gonna like go after that for so long and pursue it for so long. And for a lot of women, if we don't have the emotional intimacy, we're not interested in the sexual intimacy, which is, again, a need of a lot of men. And for a lot of women, myself included. I love sexual intimacy. I have no problem, you know, saying that. And so, but again, I think that if, you know, most women, if they don't have the emotional intimacy, that's not something that they're typically, especially with a spouse, that they're interested in, you know, engaging in. So we've got this man-woman challenge and dynamic at play here, right? We've got a challenge that is a time-old tale. And the question is, in evolution, and we've talked about this before, like women have evolved quite a bit since the time of cavemen. Have men evolved on the same level? Have they come along? Have they evolved emotionally? Do they experience the rainbow of emotions, or do they just go from happy, content, angry? What about all the other stuff in between? Is that part of who they're sharing and exposing themselves to be to the people in their life, or even to complete strangers? So we've got this dynamic now that says if all those needs that were there originally for traditional marriage no longer hold up today, what's going to keep this traditional train a-moving when it comes to marriage? And I think what I see happening already and what's going to continue to happen is a redefining of marriage. There is all kinds of marriages that exist today. They don't just exist between man and woman. They exist between same-gender marriages. There are many people out there who choose to have children and are like, hey, I don't really have a need to actually get married. I'm very happy and content and satisfied, you know, knowing that this is my partner and we have the same values. We live together. We're raising kids together. So that's another basic redefinition of family today. We have a lot of people who are consciously single and choosing to have kids and raising them that way. And, you know, judgment aside, by anybody that might be out there saying, hey, in my opinion, I think this is better or worse, is irrelevant. Judgment is irrelevant, especially as time moves on. And I think as younger generations go, they care less and less about what the neighbors think. They care less and less about tradition. They care less and less about formal restrictions that were placed by earlier generations. They don't have any interest in it. So to claim that people would be passed on judgment, so that would force them down the road of tradition, I just don't think that holds up either anymore. I wonder too, here's the big thing that just recently came to me that I think is a big challenger to this is, again, speaking of traditional marriage between a man and a woman who get married, who plan on being just the two of them together, raising kids for the rest of their life, think about that in the baby boomer generation and older, they would probably get married sometime in their 20s, and life expectancy at the time was maybe in your 70s into early 80s. So you're kind of looking and going, I'm making about a 50-year commitment here. That's probably what I'm signing up for. Well, in today's day and age, I know my generation life expectancy for women is 92. And obviously each generation comes and goes, and with the advancements in medical technology, it's going to get even older. So one would venture to say is like, hey, if people are getting married or they're getting together in some way, shape, or form, and they're having kids in their 20s, you basically have almost like 2 lifetimes ahead of you. Are people really going to be like, hey, me and you, next 80 to 100 years? Like, I don't know if people are really looking to sign up for that. And that, again, where does that validity and value in marriage come from when it could be like, hey, we're making a decision because right now we have respect and we love and we have care for each other and we want the same things in terms of raising kids and we have similar values. So we're going to have children and we're not going to get married and we're not going to make that lifelong commitment because there's a very real possibility that once the kids have grown up and they're out of the house or they're, in college or out of college, that 2 people decide it's time for them to go live on the next phase of their life. People talk about retirement in that way all the time. People are going out there for a second career. What if that's the same thing in terms of people's lives when it comes to, hey, I'm going to go out there by myself, or I'm going to go out there and find another person who I have a different connection with and spend the rest of, my next 40 years with that person. I already did 40 with one. I'm going to go do 40 with another. I just think that there's a lot to consider here when it comes to traditional marriage. And when you release yourselves from the confines of judgment and you release yourselves from the confines of tradition and you take into account all of these very real, impacts such as, medical technology and again, generational, components, and you take, role gender, our gender roles, and you take on top of it life expectancy. I mean, there's so many things that could really, I think, very realistically within just the next 50 years, that could really make the people who are pursuing traditional marriage the minority. How do you feel about that, guys? Like, what are your feelings? What are your thoughts on that? I'm going to hop over to, comments here and just get some feedback on this. What are some feedback? So let me see here. So there's a comment in here that says, you're lucky if you find both in your person. And I'm assuming both would be not only like someone who you connect with and you have the same interests and the same desires in terms of a family, but on top of that, you have the emotional connection. And then on top of that, you also have the sexual intimacy. So I'm with you, girl. And then there's another good call out here, which is a lot of people choose not to have children for the very same reasons in terms of challenges. Very, very good point. What else, guys? What are your thoughts? I mean, how does it make you feel to hear that, like, literally traditional marriage may just not exist in 50 years? There's a person who just called out and said, at this rate, they're not interested in getting married. And then as a result of that, maybe we'll just throw the whole stigma away from it too, which again, I agree. I think that people are just like, oh my gosh, the pressure of like being like, when are you going to get married or who are you going to get married to? And then what, experiencing divorce in your life. Like people are like, it's just not worth it. How about I just go out there and find like a person who I actually emotionally connect with and just make a decision in partnership and not have it be with all the traditional confines and limitations. So who knows? Anybody else have any feelings about this? Like, I think it's honestly something really worthwhile thinking about. It's certainly something that's been on this crazy brain quite a bit. And again, mostly because of several conversations with, literally 5-6 people I've talked to about this very topic and challenges within their own marriage. And so, that's kind of the gist of it today. And I'm gonna leave these deep thoughts and analysis of traditional marriage with you on this hot topic. If you enjoyed this video, I would love to ask you to share, to like, and also on my YouTube channel, Mom Mogul of 4, to subscribe, ring the bell for notifications if you haven't done so already. It really helps me and my business, and as a result, my team out a lot in terms of getting us the exposure for all the amazing work and support we're offering to our clients out there that we possibly can. So helping out a fellow lady in business would be an amazing thing. But otherwise, thank you all so much. Have an amazing rest of your day, an amazing weekend, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.